Hi, my name is James Arroyo, and welcome to Chapter 7 Communication and Culture. Communication affects everything. Every Our word choices, our nonverbal behavior, bowing, how close we stand. All of these things are based in our culture, and these external manifestations, these external behaviors tend to come from internal values and beliefs. So, culture is something that if we learn more of, we will be able to be better intercultural citizens, therefore, communicate with other cultures more effectively. Since we live in a globalized world where we do now have contact with people across multiple cultures, it behooves us, it's important that we actually learn how to engage in intercultural communication. Culture is like an iceberg. On the surface level, the stuff that we see are these behaviors, be it taking off shoes as you enter a home, dances, pop culture that you see, K-pop, or these songs that people sing, or celebrations that people do. That is very much the surface level, the stuff that we see. But if we delve even deeper into culture, the immediate level could be symbols, meanings, and norms that we do not see. We also could see traditions, beliefs, and values that are different from ourselves, but underneath all of it are our universal basic needs. So, yes, there are a lot of surface level differences we will see. And those come from deep seated differences in regards to values, beliefs, and symbol systems. But underneath all of it, we are all people and we all have similarities. So when we engage with people of different cultures, we can gain a great deal from these relationships. Some of the outcomes for the day. First, we're going to define and explain culture and its impact on our communication. We're going to delineate 7 ways that cultural variables affect communication, describe communicative power of group affiliations, explain key barriers of competent intercultural communication, and then we're going to demonstrate behaviors that contribute to intercultural competence, aka to try to overcome these barriers. The goal of today overall is to help us understand cultural differences and similarities and increase competence in intercultural encounters. In other words, to become better intercultural communicators. Let's dive right in. We start with what is culture. Culture is a learned system of thought and behavior that typifies a large group of people and includes their beliefs, values, and practices. Breaking that down a little bit, culture is a learned system of thought and behavior. So, not just what you should do in the culture, but also how you should think in the culture. So, a lot of the behaviors that we see come from much deeper beliefs. And they typify a large group and include beliefs, what we believe, what is right, what is true, what is false, values, what is good and what is bad, and practices, how to act in these situations. Culture affects our communication in an insane amount of ways. I know, mind blown. So, we are going to be discussing these things. But why be intercultural? What's the point? Well, there is an insane amount of diversity within the American culture. to start, but in a more globalized world, we are going to have more encounters with people across cultures because organizations, a lot of organizations, now span across multiple continents. Also, mobility. If you are better able to build relationships with those who are intercultural, therefore, you are more likely to be able to build fulfilling relationships and therefore move up corporate ladders. Also, it helps with mediated interactions by understanding um, some of the cultural differences and similarities. It allows us to engage in communication mediated interactions a lot better. And with these diverse organizations, we will need to engage in intercultural communication. We can learn much from different cultures. It is like there are so many ways to peel a banana, but we will only learn these if we learn from people beyond our own worldview. And by understanding other people's cultures, we will be able to come to different conclusions from the very same problems that we have. So there are many ways that we can miscommunicate across cultures. Let's watch some surprising ways we can offend people. So there may have been a few of these that were a bit shocking and could be ways that we could very much offend people, but keeping in mind these are just external behaviors and they come from inner symbol systems as well as values and beliefs that are more inherent to their identity. So there are a great deal of intercultural differences. So by understanding them better, we are more likely to be able to be successful in these interactions. Keep in mind that there are some things that we do that can also be shocking to other cultures. One that is very that we don't usually think about is, how do we start a conversation with someone? Hey, how you doing? That can be very shocking to someone because they are thinking, well, you just asked how I'm doing, and now you're just walking away from the conversation, not expecting to actually get an answer as to how I'm doing. So there are many things that go across cultures that are very different and unique. So there are 7 cultural variations that affect communication. These are the more ingrained things within us. And by understanding these variations better, it allows us to improve our communication with these different groups. We have collectivistic versus individualistic, high versus low context, high uncertainty avoidance or low uncertainty avoidance, masculine or feminine, or also called achievement-oriented versus nurturing, power distance, either high power distance or low power distance cultures, monochronic versus polychronic orientations in regards to time, and emotional expressions. Are we more hyperbolic or understated? Let's jump right in. We start with worldview. Individualistic cultures tend to value autonomy, personal space, and privacy with little attention to hierarchy or status. One of my friends from way back in the day when dinosaurs roamed the earth, he was a bit of a problem child. He would play video games and then they'd say, hey, stop playing video games, and he wouldn't do it, which totally just blew me away. But as a result, they took his door off of his hinges so that he lost his privacy. That was seen as something that was incredibly shocking, and due to the value of personal space and autonomy, by removing it, it was a big punishment. However, in a collectivistic culture, cooperation, group decision-making, stable friendships, and clear hierarchies would run counter to this. If someone were to take off a door, the privacy situation may not even be an issue. Could also be that since there are such a very clear hierarchy between parents and children, it would not even be something that I could argue against as a child because of the hierarchy. So, in an individualistic culture, we are more about me, whereas in collectivistic cultures, we are more about we. So, how does each family reflect their worldview? So they have been invited to a dinner between the families. So one family is Greek, another family is white, I guess. So yeah, let's go ahead. Sorry, had to give a little bit of context.
Welcome to my home. Over here is my brother, Ted, and his wife, Melissa, and their children, Anita, Diane, and Nick. Over here, my brother, Tommy, his wife, Angie, and their children, Anita, Diane, and Nick. And here, my brother, George, his wife, Frida, and their children, Anita, Diane, and Nick. Taki, Sophie, Kari, Nick, Nicky, and I am Gus.
I am Maria Portocalos, and welcome to our home. Thank you. What is it?
It's a bunt.
A bun?
Bunt. Bonk. Bunt.
Bon.
Bunt. Bunt.
In a cakey body.
It's a cake. I know. Thank you very, very much.
Excellent. So, some of the ways that this collectivistic versus individualistic worldviews were represented was that they were invited to a family gathering. So, I believe it was a more white Anglo-Saxon Protestant culture. They thought immediate family versus the more, which is the more individualistic viewpoint, whereas the Greek culture tended to see that as a more collectivistic mindset of the entire family. Also, another thing that was mentioned was that when there were differences in contact between the cultures. The white Anglo-Saxon Protestant culture, touch was sort of seen as weird, whereas in the Greek culture, he was ready to hug. So there were a lot of differences in these worldviews being represented through behavior, but also through the mindsets that led to those behaviors. We next move on to high context versus low context cultures. In high context cultures, we are sending subtle messages, relying on contextual cues. In other words, we are focusing more on the context. Whereas in low context cultures, it is more direct language with little reliance on contextual cues. So, no context, or you don't need context to create the meaning. A high context, so for example, a high context coffee cup would be like this. You know that it's coffee because it is found in a coffee shop and because the certain lid, but you do not need any sort of information on it. You know through the contextual cues that that is indeed coffee. Whereas in a low context coffee cup, there would be not just a sign that says coffee, also the story of the beans, and a caution this beverage may be hot. So, which one do you feel like we fall into? It is more likely that low context communication culture because, and it's actually very interesting, due to our litigation system, that we have to be more direct, otherwise someone could potentially get sued. But on the flip side, high context is also very valuable because if we are too low context to people who are more high context cultures, we may be seen as blunt or rude. So, a good example of this is getting fired. In a low context culture, I would say, you're fired. You're out of here. Go. You're done. I'd have to directly let you know. Whereas in a high context culture, I may just stop giving you tasks. And it would then be on you to understand, oh, you're being polite. You aren't firing me so that I can quit on my own terms in a face saving way. And because of this face saving, it is also indicative of the type of worldview, because individualistic cultures would focus more in low context. It's more about me, and therefore I do not care as much about your face, your perception, the identity that you put out into the world. Versus a high context where it is more about we, I do want to preserve more of your face. We also have comfort with uncertainty. Low uncertainty avoidance cultures have a greater tolerance for ambiguity and risk. This is more indicative of this individualistic culture because it is more about me, therefore, I don't mind if things are a little bit ambiguous because it is just for me. Whereas with high uncertainty avoidance cultures, there it is more about reducing uncertainty and risk in interaction. This usually involves following rules and valuing honesty and stability. This happens a lot within relationships. There are specific rules that need to be followed within the relationship so that and because of these rules, it reduces uncertainty about the situation so that I can predict the interaction better. Some of the specific rules regarding relationships of high uncertainty avoidance cultures could be you should take off your shoes when you enter a home. You should bow in these certain scenarios. You should not make eye contact because of this, that, the other. You also should, um, if you're if you want to marry someone, you have to ask this person. So there are a lot of specific and codified rules that help manage stability of the family or relationship unit because it is more about we. Whereas low uncertainty avoidance, they may not care as much about that because it is more about I. And that if we don't have a relationship, that doesn't really matter as much to me because I am my own person. I am an individual. We also have masculine versus feminine orientations in regards to communicate, and this is a value. Masculine or achievement cultures value assertiveness, achievement, ambition, and competitiveness, whereas feminine or nurturing cultures tend to value relationships, quality of life, affection, friendliness, and social support. Guess what? Individualistic tend to be more masculine and achievement oriented because it is again about me. It is about my achievement, my ambition. It is about me winning over other people versus more collectivistic cultures where it is more about the relationship and I may be more likely to try to improve the quality of life, the relationships of everyone versus just my own well being. This is very much represented in collectivistic cultures in how their governments are run. A lot of collectivistic cultures tend to have more social support programs and ways to improve quality of life versus more individualistic or achievement cultures, which it is more about achievement and ambition, and if we do not reach that on our own, then you will not get that. We move on to power distance. Power distance, in high power distance cultures, there is a strong hierarchy, and there's more anxiety when speaking to those of higher status. Think of this as a good example of this high power distance would be back in medieval times where peasants and serfs were at the very bottom, then to merchants, farmers, and craftsmen, then to knights and vassals, then to nobles, then to monarchs, and then eventually to the Pope and Church. There is very strong hierarchy, and when peasants had to communicate with merchants, farmers, or craftsmen, or more likely knights and vassals, they had to bow and grovel and change their communication a lot more and were more anxious when speaking to people of higher status. Whereas in low power distance cultures, there is little to no hierarchy, little anxiety when speaking to those of higher status. A good example of this would be back when I worked at Disneyland. I would have to talk to managers and we would be able to just talk about whatever. It really didn't matter as much because there wasn't that high of power distance and I didn't have to accommodate or try to change my communication to be more like to adapt more to their higher power. This is absolutely reflected in individualistic versus collectivistic cultures. High power distance cultures tend to be more collectivistic. They focus in uncertainty avoidance, and with a strong hierarchy, you know how to interact with people based on their position within the hierarchy. Whereas in low power distance cultures, since there is little to no hierarchy, it is more about my own individual self. Therefore, since I don't care a lot about the uncertainty, I just communicate how I would normally communicate. We also have time orientation. Time orientation involves monochronic and polychronic cultures. Monochronic cultures tend to treat time as a limited resource. It can be saved or wasted. And the moniker of time is money is very indicative of the monochronic culture. Individualistic cultures tend to be more monochronic because it is more about saving my time, and if you are wasting my time, that is something that is a violation of my expectation. We also have polychronic cultures. Polychronic cultures are comfortable dealing with multiple tasks and people at the same time. It may not be a scheduled thing. Instead, it takes as long as it takes. This again is indicative of a collectivistic culture because it is trying to maintain relational harmony, and if we don't really care a lot about the time investment, then it allows for other people to take some of our time. And we have emotional expression. This involves hyperbole, vivid, colorful language, and with emotional intensity to express emotion, versus understatement, which downplays emotions and may include euphemisms. Guess what? Our culture tends to focus more in understatement because we do not want to affect others. It is we downplay emotions because we do not want to communicate or feel those emotions. Whereas in hyperbole cultures, they may have better understandings and emotional intelligence. So these are 7 cultural variations that affect communication. So how do they affect us? Many ways. These are the inherent things, and then those usually relate to a lot of behaviors, not to mention that we are very much affected by our worldview and by how other people treat us. So it is something very important to understand. We also have groups because not just do we live in a larger culture, we also live within co-cultures where people have connections to many smaller structures. Some of the things that we talked about were football teams. The Raiders versus the Patriots have different cultures. In the same way, Democrats and Republicans have different cultures. In the same way, different religions have different cultures, even though they are all within the American culture. So, how do we communicate intergroup, between groups? People communicate with others based on what group identity is salient. In other words, which group is standing out, what is called to attention. So, for example, if I were talking to some stranger I didn't know, then we would start talking. I would start saying things like, "Hey, what do you like to do for fun?" This is to reduce uncertainty of the situation, but that is just something that happens. So, he or she says, "Oh, I love video games." Oh, I love video games too. We now understand that we are within the co-culture of video game lovers. That is very much a culture. Then I ask, hey, what video game console do you play on? They say, Nintendo. I say, I play on Nintendo too. Wow, we are even more within the video game culture of Nintendo culture. And as a result, that group identity is now most salient. Now we're talking about that. We're talking about that. And I say, oh, yeah, I love Mario Galaxy because, yeah, I love Mario Galaxy, especially the planets and how you're able to jump around them. It's very, very cool. And then the other person says, oh, but that's not really realistic because the Earth is flat. Uh-oh. At that point, the new salient group identity is that I believe that the Earth is round and the other person believes that the Earth is flat. At that point, that co-cultural identity is most salient. So we have been converging together. We've been identifying with each other. Now we are in an irreconcilable difference. At that point, I then say, whoa, diverge, diverge, diverge. You know what? I actually have to go. Oh, I just got a text and, my dog is in the hospital, so I have to go. Bye. So that is how those group identities become salient and that we communicate in those cultures. Keep in mind that we could have extreme differences, but if the group culture that the co-culture that is most salient is similar, then we are able to have good communication within that culture. Not to say that if our group communication, our cultures are different, that we would be unable to communicate or that we would not be able to eventually find areas of similarity. We then jump into social identity theory. We have a social identity and we have a personal identity. Personal identity are what we think of ourselves in moments of honest self-reflection. Whereas our social identity is how we see ourselves within the groups that we are a part of. Think back to high school. What were some of your group identities? For me, I was actor, I was a cross-country runner, and I would also say that I was pretty good at both of them. So I saw myself within both of those groups as in the better than average areas of those. And as a result, I felt like I was more successful and valuable within those cultures. That improved my identity, that affected my self-concept, therefore improved my self-esteem, and was very much based on my self-efficacy in both of those situations, that I would succeed in those situations. We also, within these social identities, have in-groups versus out-groups. In the in-group, the in-group is seen as more favored versus the out-group. So I, as an actor in high school, thought, my group is awesome for all of these reasons. Some of the values and beliefs we experienced and behaviors were that we were very outgoing. We liked art. We were very close-knit together. We were able to communicate with each other well. We were always cracking jokes. All of these were indicative of this co-culture within the larger culture of Saratoga High School. But there were also out-groups. They were the band or the athletes. This is where some of that identity could be challenging because, as you saw, I was part of both in a way. So I had to negotiate both of those identities. But a lot of times, the distinction between the two was not really salient. I was more focused on that in-group identification. But a lot of times we look at out-groups as less than us, because if they were more than us, then we would go to that out-group. The popular kids, I felt, were an outgroup because it seemed like to me, although this was probably just based in my own ideas, that they were less able to communicate their ideas because they had the pressure of being popular. Also, that they um, um, did things that were not really acceptable since we were under the age of 21, and other things. So, because of that, I valued the in-group identity over the out-group, and therefore I stayed within my own in-group identity. Think back to the Stanford prison experiment. The people in the in-group of the prison guards were held in their social identity far above the out-group that was the prisoners. So they may have had a personal identity that was caring and kind and intelligent and affluent and good communicators and non-aggressive. But because the social identity was more relevant and more salient within this situation, they were able to do very aggressive and not so kind things to those prison uh, uh, to the people within the prison. There are many obstacles in regards to intercultural communication. Anxiety is one that we don't usually think about, but is a very common one. And it is actually the one that seems the least uh, harmful. When we approach intercultural communication, we feel uncertain because we may do something wrong. We may communicate something we didn't mean to. We may not know really what the other person is receiving. And we tend to avoid situations in which we are uncertain. So we feel anxious about it when we are uncertain. So the goal of this is not to avoid these situations entirely. Because with any situation where we feel anxious, when we do not engage with it, the anxiety only increases. Public speaking. When people do not engage with public speaking, that anxiety only increases. If we feel anxious communicating with those of of different cultures, our anxiety will increase if we do not engage. This can come from of good intentions that we don't want to offend, but we have to be putting ourselves out there so that we are engaging interculturally. Also, we may have ethnocentrism, the belief that our values, beliefs, and behaviors are right and other people's values, beliefs, and behaviors are wrong. And when that happens, it can be very disastrous if the group, the values, beliefs, and the behaviors of the majority override those of the minority. And there is even discrimination. This falls into two sections: behavioral affirmation, seeing what one wants to see based on beliefs. A good example of this, and obviously this is not a true stereotype, that Asian Americans are worse drivers. The reason why we see that is due to selective perception, because when we see an Asian driver, cutting someone off, then that confirms our initial perception, confirms our schema, and as a result, we then put more value on that than the 10 or 15 or 20 other drivers that were not of that culture who also did boneheaded moves on the road. So we have to be sure that we are removing this from us. Another example of this, and this is where we get into systemic issues, is behavioral confirmation. People act in ways that confirm expectations of the group. So for example, if I were to think that all students from a particular group, from a particular school district, let's say, are not intelligent. They are less capable. And I then lower my expectations and only give them assignments that are super easy with very little instruction. Then, if they don't do well on that, or even if they do meet that, it is confirming my initial discrimination, because even if they did well, it doesn't matter because they met the very low expectations that I had set for them. This can be in more disastrous ways. In fact, a study recently done by a professor here, Dr. John Bruschke, found that in a lot of non-white, that schools or universities with higher white populations tend to have more funding than those of more diverse populations. And that can be seen as some behavioral confirmation, because if the belief, the discrimination, and a wrong belief that, white students are going to achieve more and therefore they get more funding, that's going to show that. Versus if they feel that, more diverse populations are less able to achieve, therefore they receive less funding, and therefore they don't get that, they don't get the opportunities that would be afforded to them if there were more funding. So let's go ahead and continue. Do you see, look to see if you see behavioral affirmation and behavioral confirmation within this video. You may have already seen this video, but this is a small study in children, and it is fairly old. Children very socially learn. They are sponges, and they take in a lot of the information that is coming from the culture, and they, without a filter, communicate it out. So that being said, there are going to be some less than appropriate language, but the goal of this is to show some of this discrimination at play in this classroom.
This is a special week. Does anybody know what it is?
National Brotherhood.
National Brotherhood Week. What's brotherhood?
Be kind to your brothers. Be kind.
Okay, be kind to your brothers.
Like you would like to be treated.
Treat everyone the way you would like to be treated. Treat everyone as though he was your brother. And is there anyone in this United States that we do not treat as our brothers?
Yeah.
Who?
Yeah.
The black people. Who else?
Indians.
Absolutely, the Indians. And when many people see a black person or a yellow person or a red person, what do they think?
Oh, look at that. Look at that. Dumb people.
And look at the dumb people. What else do they think sometimes? What kinds of things do they say about black people?
Oh, call them niggers.
In the city, many places in the United States, how are black people treated? How are Indians treated? How are people who are of a different color than we are treated?
They're part of this world. They don't get anything in this world.
Why is that?
Because they're different color.
You think you know how that would feel to be judged by the color of your skin?
Yeah.
Do you think you do? No, I don't think you'd know how that felt unless you had been through it, would you? It might be interesting to judge people today by the color of their eyes. Would you like to try this?
Yeah.
I love that they think, oh, this is going to be fun. We're going to be discriminatory against each other. I love it. So, as you can see, they are very much reflecting the culture in which they are born in that they are in like 1970s, I believe, not to mention a completely white classroom that is not very cognizant of the uh, the effects of some of the systemic racism of their fellow brothers and sisters. So let's go ahead and continue.
I'm the teacher and I have blue eyes. I think maybe the blue-eyed people should be on top the first day.
Up here?
I mean, the blue-eyed people are the better people in this room. Oh, yes, they are. Blue-eyed people are smarter than brown-eyed people.
My dad isn't that stupid.
Is your dad brown-eyed?
Yeah.
One day you came to school and you told us that he kicked you.
He did.
Do you think a blue-eyed father would kick his son?
Yeah. My
dad's blue-eyed. He's never kicked me. Greg's dad is blue-eyed.
I love that the adult just nodded at that, but we'll continue.
Rex's dad is blue-eyed. He's never kicked him. This is a fact. Blue-eyed people are better than brown-eyed people. Are you brown-eyed or blue-eyed?
Blue.
Why are you shaking your head?
I don't know.
Are you sure that you're right? Why? What makes you so sure that you're right?
I don't know.
The blue-eyed people get 5 extra minutes of recess, while the brown-eyed people have to stay in. The brown-eyed people do not get to use the drinking fountain. You'll have to use the paper cups. You brown-eyed people are not to play with the blue-eyed people on the playground because you are not as good as blue-eyed people. Well, the brown-eyed people in this room today are going to wear collars so that we can tell from a distance what color your eyes are. On page 127.
100.
127. Is everyone ready? Everyone but Laurie. Ready, Laurie?
Brown-eyed.
She's a brown-eyed. You'll begin to notice today that we spend a great deal of time waiting for brown-eyed people. The yardstick's gone. Well, okay. I don't see the yardstick, do you?
It's coming over there. Hey, Miss Lake, you better keep that on your desk so if the brown-eyed people get out of hand.
Oh! You think if the brown-eyed people get out of hand, that would be the thing to use? Who goes first to lunch?
Blue-eyed.
The blue-eyed people. No brown-eyed people go back for seconds. Blue-eyed people may go back for seconds. Brown-eyed people do not.
Brown-eyed.
Don't you know?
They're not smart.
Is that the only reason?
They'll take too much.
It might take too much. Okay, quiet.
So, what were some of the ways they engaged in behavioral affirmation and behavioral confirmation? Behavioral affirmation, keep in mind, is what we see from the situation. The teacher created meaning of what it meant that they were going a little bit slower, that instead of working on the problem more, they were instead dumb, and therefore, because of the color of their eyes. And due to the teacher's power position within this classroom, their communication was more impactful, and leaders in total, their communication is more salient within an organization. They have more impact over the culture. So, behavioral affirmation was seen, but also behavioral confirmation. When this disadvantaged group of the brown-eyed student, and this can be transferred across to other disadvantaged groups, that when there are these challenges happening to people, then they act out in many different ways. Because if there is no system to air these grievances, without the behavioral affirmation of, oh, it's a brown-eyed student just, being awful and just complaining, then there has to be some other way to act out. Keep in mind, again, social identity. The social identity that's at play here and that's most salient is blue-eyed people are better than brown-eyed people. And because of this, they have to interact with each other in a different way.
And it seemed like when we were down on the bottom, everything bad was happening to us.
The way they treated you, you felt like you didn't even want to try to do anything.
It seemed like Mrs. Elliot was taking our best friends away from us.
What happened at recess? Were two of you boys fighting?
Yeah, Russell and John were.
What happened, John?
Russell called me names and I hit him in the gut.
What did he call you?
Brown eyes.
Did you call him brown eyes?
They always call us that. Craig and all of the boys call us that. They call us brown eyes. They say, come here, brown eyes. And they were calling us blue eyes. I wasn't. Sandy
Keep
and
in
Don
mind
were.
that the symbol system around brown eye is now more salient and as a result has a more negative connotation. Also keep in mind that this student just punched this other student in the gut. And that, so this could even act as this sort of behavioral confirmation that because of this systematic difference, that the other person, the brown-eyed student, acted out. And on top of that, they were these very, very before this, very kind students relished the power difference of being a blue-eyed student to this lower-powered brown-eyed student because they were in the more advantageous position. And therefore, if left unchecked, someone could hold a great deal of identity pride. And this is very much where we get into racism and, racial supremacy.
Yeah.
What's wrong with being called brown eyes?
It means that we're stupider. Well, not that. But... Oh, that's just the same way as other people.
Okay, yeah. But keep in mind that he had that little struggle too, where he says that, well, I guess brown people are more dumb. Well, not that. His social identity and personal identity are in conflict because he thinks that he's smart personally, but the social identity states that he's less smart. So we really have to understand that, especially in America, where discrimination has been a fundamental part of the American experience for a wide swath of our population, that we have to understand that people are coming from different backgrounds and that is affecting a lot. And it is affecting our culture and therefore how we communicate with others. Anyway, I tried to avoid that part. Anyway, how to improve intercultural communication. Areas to improve are by changing cognitions, being mindful of how our attitudes, beliefs, and our values, beliefs, and behaviors affect us, and how other people's values, beliefs, and behaviors affect them. Also by changing our feelings, changing our attitudes, changing our emotions so that we actually try to have a desire to learn from different cultures. And this means changing our behavior. What are some of the ways that we may be reinforcing some of these cross-cultural challenges, be it discrimination, be it ethnocentrism, be it even something as small as anxiety? What are some behaviors that we can specifically do to change this today? And we also have to keep in mind intergroup contact theory. This states that the more contact we have with different groups, the more identification we will form into. Think back to my example where we went from video games to more video games, then to like flat earthers. When we communicate with each other, we start identifying with each other more. And as a result, those people tend to become more attractive to us as friends. This does not mean that we are going to solve racial challenges by putting a member of the KKK and a civil rights leader in a room and then they'll just solve their issues. Of course not. But by having more interaction with groups that are diverse, it allows us to start building connections with those groups. And we also have communication accommodation theory. We want to try to converge, try to change our communication styles in ways that are more similar to others. That way we can start communicating more effectively, but we also do not want to over accommodate because that can be seen as offensive. So, lastly, how to communicate interculturally. The big thing is to practice. Just like anything else, it is always comes down to practice. How did Steph Curry and Michael Jordan weren't shooting threes out of the womb? They had to practice. So in our intercultural communication, we have to be able to practice as well. We have to practice listening and trying to understand people who are different from us. We also have to think differently and try to practice breaking down some of our beliefs and why they could potentially be faulty. And also practice empathizing with other people around us. Just because I have not had the same experiences as other people doesn't mean that I can't empathize and try to understand others. And also practicing being ethical. Sometimes it is easy to be unethical. Some examples of this, I'm sure that everyone's had a time when someone at school, a friend told a racist or sexist joke, and it was easier to say nothing and to just preserve the friendship. But we have to act in more ethical ways by challenging these, and this does take practice because this is a vulnerable act. That concludes culture. Have a great rest of your day.